Take it off, the billionaire said, loud enough for the whole private room to hear. The dress, right here. Laughter rippled around the table like spilled champagne. The waitress didn't flinch. She set down a tray, met his eyes, and asked calmly, "You want me to undress in front of your guests, sir?" "Say it again." The Meridian was a members-only dining club hidden behind an unmarked door off Madison. No prices on the menu, no windows, soundproof velvet on the walls. The kind of place built for men who hated consequences. At the center table sat Adrian Voss, $3 billion in a tailored suit, smiling like rules were for other people. His friends looked the same in different fonts. Hedge fund teeth, political connections, watches that could pay off a mortgage. They'd been drinking for hours, each toast louder, each joke crueler, until the room felt less like dinner and more like a hunting party. Lila Hart worked the table alone. Black uniform, hair pinned, eyes down until they needed something, then up just long enough to read the temperature. She'd learned to move like she belonged everywhere and nowhere, because that's what this job demanded. Adrian watched her the way some men watched stock charts. "Hey," he said as she topped off his glass. "How much do you make doing this?" "It depends on the night." "No," he said, amused. "Give me a number." The men leaned in. They loved polite humiliation. They called it entertainment. Lila placed the bottle down without a sound. "Enough." Adrian chuckled, reached into his jacket, and dropped a thick roll of hundreds onto the linen. The money looked obscene against the white cloth. "This is enough to change your month," he said. "Do something for it." One of the men shifted, half laughing, half nervous. "Adrian." That only made Adrian's grin widen. He tapped the roll with one finger. Lila didn't reach for it. She didn't even look at it. Adrian nodded toward her dress. "Take it off." A couple of them laughed too hard, trying to prove they were in on the joke. Someone raised a phone, screen glowing in the dim light. Lila stepped closer, set her tray down directly in front of Adrian, perfectly centered. Then she unpinned her name tag and placed it on the tray like a signature. The tiny click of metal on silver sliced through the laughter. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to be?" "My name," she said. "So there's no confusion about who you're talking to." The room quieted. Not out of decency, out of instinct. People could smell when a scene was about to turn. Lila kept her voice low and even. "You're offering me cash to remove my clothes in front of you, and these guests?" she said, separating the words like they mattered. "Is that what you're asking?" Adrian leaned back, enjoying himself. "Yes?" "Not yes," she replied, still calm. "Say it." For the first time all night, Adrian Voss hesitated. The hesitation was small, but everyone saw it. Power didn't like being directed. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled again, colder. "Fine," he said, louder, so nobody could pretend they didn't hear. "I want you to undress. Here, in front of everyone." Silence hit the table. Even the sommelier near the door froze with a decanter in his hands. The air turned thin, like the room itself had stopped breathing. The men who had been laughing a second ago suddenly looked at their glasses, at their plates, anywhere but the words hanging in the air. Lila nodded once, as if he'd finally placed a proper order. She picked up her name tag, clipped it back onto her dress with steady fingers, and glanced at the phone still pointed toward the table. "Good," she said softly. "That's all I needed." Then she turned and walked out of the private room without hurrying, leaving Adrian Voss staring after her, his money untouched. Lila didn't run when she left the private room. She walked like she always walked in the Meridian, like she belonged even in the corridor, behind the velvet curtain where the air smelled of bleach and expensive perfume. She heard Adrian Voss's chair scrape, and his footsteps followed fast, angry, controlled marlow. The floor manager caught her at the service station, his face tight, because he'd felt the room shift without hearing the words. "What did you do?" he whispered. And then Adrian was there. "Fire her," he said. "Right now she just embarrassed me." Marlow looked at Lila like an apology could bend reality. Lila kept her hands folded. "I didn't embarrass you, sir," she said. "I repeated your request." Adrian's mouth curled. "Don't play smart with me." Marlow tried to soften it. "Sir, we can comp you. We can move you to the cigar lounge." "No," Adrian cut him off. "I want her gone, and I want her blacklisted from every property in this city." A runner nearby froze, holding plates like a shield. Lila watched the hallway. Like it was a stage, Marlow lowered his voice. "Lila, please, just go home. I'll pay you for the night. I'll handle it." She saw the fear in his eyes, the kind that lived in men who knew rich people could end them with a call. Lila reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her phone. But she didn't brandish it. She angled the screen so only Marlow could see a draft message with 4 words and a name at the top. He said it. "Sent?" Marlow's eyes flicked to the name and his throat bobbed. "Who is that?" he breathed. Lila didn't answer. She just tapped send and slid the phone away. A second later, it buzzed, once against her hip. And that was the first crack in Marlow's certainty. Adrian leaned closer. "You think you can walk out and keep your job after disrespecting me?" Lila's voice stayed flat. "I'm not asking to keep my job. I'm asking you to keep speaking. Because the moment you stop, the story changes." Adrian blinked as if she'd spoken another language. Marlow stiffened because he heard it too. He tried to regain control. "Lila, if you won't comply, I have to remove you from the floor." And then softer. "Please don't make this worse." Lila looked past them to the mirrored wall, where a tiny green indicator light sat so small most people would miss it. Then back to Adrian. "If you want me fired," she said, why say it out loud? Tell him you're firing me because I refused to take my clothes off for you in front of your guests." The hallway went silent. Adrian's smile twitched. He leaned in close enough for only her to hear. "You'll regret this." And then louder for Marlow. "She's unstable. Get her out of my sight now." Marlow's hand shook as he reached for his radio. But Lila cut in gently. "You don't need security," she said. "I'm not leaving. I'm finishing the table, and if you pull me off that floor for refusing him, you'll be doing it for the record too." Marlow went pale because he finally saw the trap he'd been stepping toward, and he didn't know which side he was on. Lila nodded once, "Thank you," she said, and turned to go. Marlow caught her wrist. "Don't," he warned. "They'll eat you alive." Lila slipped free. "They already tried." She replied and walked back through the curtain with nothing but composure. Adrian followed a beat later, trying to look amused, but the private room had changed while she was gone. The laughter was gone. The phones were down, like someone had remembered how expensive evidence could be. One man avoided Adrian's eyes. Another stared into his. Glass too long. Lila returned to her station, picked up the bottle she'd left, and began pouring with a steady hand. She set a fresh napkin beside Adrian's glass and leaned in just enough to be heard. "We can continue as normal," she said, "or you can repeat your order for the whole table again. Your choice." Adrian stared at her like he couldn't decide whether to laugh or strike. And Lila kept pouring, waiting, because men like him always answered when they thought the room belonged to them. The table looked normal again on the surface. Crystal glasses, soft jazz. A server gliding past like nothing had happened. But the men weren't laughing anymore. They were measuring their words like they'd suddenly remembered walls could listen. Lila moved in and out with the rhythm she'd trained into her body. Pour step back. Clear plates, ask nothing. Answer only what was asked, and yet she was watching everything. The way you watch a stove you don't trust. Adrian Voss kept his smile on like armor, but his eyes tracked her every time she passed him. He waited until she leaned to set a dish in front of the man on his right. Then he spoke without looking up. "Where's the restroom?" he asked, his tone casual, like he didn't know exactly where it was. Lila answered, and he stood immediately. No stagger, no hesitation. He wasn't drunk. He was choosing this. He brushed past her shoulder on purpose and murmured, "You're coming in the hallway, outside the private room." The light was brighter and the air colder. Adrian stopped near a framed black and white photo of the restaurant's founder and turned on her so fast, the suit seemed to snap with him. "What do you want?" he asked, because that's what men like him asked, when they didn't understand why someone wasn't afraid. Lila kept her hands visible, palms open like she was still serving him. "I want you to stop," she said. He laughed, once short and sharp. "Stop," he repeated like it was a foreign word. "You work for tips and orders. Sweetheart, you don't tell me what to do." She didn't flinch at sweetheart either. She just held his gaze and spoke slowly so he couldn't pretend he didn't hear. "You told me to undress in front of your guests. You offered cash for it. You wanted it filmed. You wanted me to be humiliated." Adrian stepped closer, close enough that most women would step back. His cologne hit first, then his voice lower. "Now, you're going to do it privately, and this goes away. You'll get more than that roll on the table. You'll get a number that makes you forget your own name. And if you don't," he said, and his smile vanished, "then you don't serve in this city again." Lila nodded as if he'd given her a menu option. "So you're offering to pay me for a private performance," she said, "and you're saying, if I refuse, you'll use your influence to destroy my livelihood." Adrian's nostrils flared. "Don't twist my words." "Then choose better words," she said softly, "because you keep saying them out loud." For a half second, something like caution flickered across his face, and then it hardened into irritation. He leaned in. "You think you're clever, because you made me repeat something in a room full of drunk idiots." He said, "Nobody cares. Nobody's going to help you, and nobody is going to believe you." Lila glanced down the corridor toward the door of the private room, where muffled voices drifted through the velvet. In short bursts, they were talking again. They always talked again once they thought the danger had passed. She looked back at Adrian. "I don't need anyone to believe me," she said. "I just need you comfortable enough to keep talking." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means," she said evenly, "that you're not mad because I embarrassed you. You're mad because you lost control for 30 seconds. And now you're wondering who saw it and what else can be seen." His jaw tightened and he reached into his pocket. Pulling out a sleek phone, he waved it like a weapon. "You want to play recordings? I can play them too. I can make one call and your manager will watch you walk out in tears." Lila didn't move. Her voice stayed quiet. "Then do it," she said. "Call whoever you call and tell them you want me removed for refusing to strip for you. Tell them you want the footage destroyed. Tell them you want this room kept private." Adrian froze on the word footage like she'd stepped on a nerve. "What footage?" he snapped. Lila tilted her head just slightly the way a good server does when a guest asks a stupid question. "The footage you're worried about." She said, "the footage you just assumed exists because you've paid to erase things." Before his lips parted and he stopped himself too late because he'd already walked into it. "I don't pay to erase things," he said. Then corrected fast, "I don't need to." Lila's gaze didn't change, but inside she felt the click of it. The clean misstep, the unnecessary denial, the kind that came from habit, not innocence. She let him fill the silence with his own voice because silence made powerful men talk. Adrian exhaled through his nose and lowered his phone. "Fine, you want money?" he said. "I'll give you money. You want a job? I'll give you a better job. You want to be safe? I can make you safe. But you're going to do exactly what I say, and you're going to forget. Tonight happened. Forget tonight happened." Lila repeated gently, as if confirming an order. "And if I don't, then you'll learn what it feels like when a door closes and never opens again," he said, and his tone sharpened because he hated himself for explaining. "You think those men in there are your friends. They're not even mine. They're my tools, and tonight we're closing a deal that changes a lot of lives, and you're a waitress in the way." Lila let the word deal hang between them like smoke and asked the simplest question she could. "What deal?" Adrian smiled again, but it wasn't amused. Now, it was mean. "You really don't know where you are," he said. "We don't come here for the steak. We come here because nobody interrupts and nobody repeats what they hear." Lila nodded slowly and turned toward the private room, as if she'd accepted defeat. And he relaxed. For the first time since he'd followed her out. "Good girl," he murmured back inside the private room. The men were leaning in closer around the table, voices low, confident again. One of them said the inspector already signed off. Another answered, "Not for free." And a third laughed and said, "Voss handles the loose ends like he always does." Lila set a plate down beside the man who'd mentioned the inspector and smiled politely. "Would you like fresh pepper, sir?" she asked, and as she twisted the grinder, she added softly, "I'm sorry I didn't catch that who signed off." The man barely looked up. He was too busy trying to sound important to the others. "The city inspector," he said, and then, because he couldn't resist hearing himself speak, he added, "He signed the permit Friday morning." Adrian's head snapped toward her, and for the first time his friends noticed his face change, not anger, not arrogance, something closer to alarm. Lila kept grinding pepper, her expression neutral, her hands steady, like this was nothing, like she hadn't just made a dangerous man realize she wasn't just listening. She was collecting. Adrian Voss lifted his glass. "Like he could pour a new reality over the table, gentlemen," he said. "Let us not allow a misunderstanding to sour the evening." He looked at Lila and smiled. "For the room, not for her. I may have been too forward, my apologies to our hard-working staff. It was a joke. A test, some people can take it, some cannot." He started another toast to drown it out, but nobody lifted their glasses until he did. And even then, the clink sounded wrong, like metal hitting stone. A few men chuckled, because they were trained to laugh when he spoke. But the sound died fast, because nobody else joined in. The roll of hundreds still sat untouched beside his plate. Like an accusation, Lila did not glance at it. Once she kept her hand steady like a surgeon, while Adrian tried to smile through his teeth. And the room waited to see if he would double down or retreat. Lila stepped in with a fresh bottle and set a small, black folder on the linen directly in front of him. "Sir," she said, "the Meridian has a policy for resets." Adrian's smile tightened. "There is no policy, there is," she replied and tapped the cover. "You used it before when you requested privacy for your last meeting." That sentence bent the room. Heads turned not to her, but to him because a waitress was not supposed to know his patterns. Adrian flipped the folder open and saw one-page guest conduct acknowledgement, and beneath it a blank line for a signature and a line that read, "Audio and video monitoring notice for staff safety." "What is this?" he snapped. "Standard," Marlow said from the doorway, his voice thin and careful. Standard for who? Adrian said. Standard for guests who want the club to handle an incident. As a misunderstanding, Lila answered, "If you sign, you confirm there were no coercive demands made to employees tonight." One of the men leaned in to read the page, and his expression tightened because the line about monitoring was not decorative. The man with the expensive cufflinks said quietly, "Adrian, are we being recorded?" And Adrian snapped, "Of course not. This place exists, so we are not recorded." But his voice had lost its certainty. Lila did not argue. She just let the question hang like a hook. Another man shifted in his chair and slid his phone deeper into his pocket, as if it might betray him. "Coercive demands," one man muttered, and set his fork down. Another man glanced at the velvet walls, like they had grown ears. Adrian pushed the folder away. "I am not signing anything." "Then we cannot reset," Lila said calmly, "and the owners will review the incident and decide whether to keep your membership." The word membership hit him harder than any insult. He stared at her like she had slapped him with paper. "You want to threaten me with a membership?" He whispered. "I am offering you a clean story," Lila said. "You already said it out loud. Now you can write your version and sign it." The ceiling, Jazz dipped for a second, then returned softer, like someone in another room had touched a dial. Adrian's eyes lifted and followed Lila's gaze to a tiny green indicator light above the wine cabinet. Blinking steady, he had missed it earlier, but now he could not unsee it. "What is that?" He demanded. "A safety indicator." Lila said it turns on when the room is in protected mode. Protected by who? A man asked, And nobody laughed this time by the Meridian's security system, Lila said, and by the people who receive recordings when a guest violates staff policy. Adrian's face changed, not anger, now calculation. He glanced around, searching for allies, but his friends were watching him like spectators, because rich men were loyal until consequences appeared. He reached for the pen with a tight hand. Fine, he said, and wrote, fast, angry, crooked, then shoved the folder back there. I did not force anyone. Now bring the check and the contract, and we finish our deal tonight. Lila looked at the signature, like it was a receipt, then met his eyes. Of course, sir, she said, and walked away, while the green light blinked on, counting his words for anyone who knew where to listen. Lila returned with a slim leather portfolio and set it on the table as if it were the contract Adrian had demanded. The men leaned in again automatically because paper made them feel safe. It made everything look legitimate. Adrian smirked like the room had snapped back into place and tapped the folder with 2 fingers. Finally, he said, now we can get back to business. Lila didn't correct him. She simply opened the portfolio and slid out 2 documents. One was a check presenter, the kind every fine restaurant used, and the other was a single page with the meridian letterhead and a bold line at the top that read, Incident Review. Acknowledgement. Adrian's smile faltered. What is that? Lila kept her voice. Even. It's the second half of the reset, sir. The part that confirms. You understand the club's monitoring notice, and that you were informed of it tonight. He stared at the line about monitoring like it was poison. You already made me sign. Something, he hissed. Yes, Lila said. And that signature confirms you denied making coercive demands after making them on audio. The men around him went still again. One of them set his glass down too hard, and the ice clacked like teeth. Adrian's eyes flicked to his friends as if daring them to laugh. But nobody did, because the green indicator light above the wine cabinet blinked steady, and now everyone could see it. One man cleared his throat. Are we really recorded? He asked, and Lila answered without looking at him. The staff areas are always protected. The private rooms switch to protected mode. When there's a policy violation, the recordings are encrypted and forwarded to the club's counsel. In real time, Adrian leaned forward, his voice low enough to cut what counsel Lila said, the name like it was casual. Evelyn Price, and at that name, Marlow appeared in the doorway. Not alone, an older woman in a charcoal suit stepped in behind him. Hairpinned, tight expression. Calm, the kind of calm that comes from living in courtrooms. She carried a thin tablet under her arm, and 2 men followed her, who did not look like restaurant staff. No trays, no aprons, hands, free eyes trained on exits. The room tried to pretend nothing had changed, but the air knew better. Adrian's face drained and then hardened into anger. What the hell is this? He said, standing halfway as if height could save him. Evelyn Price didn't flinch, Mr. Voss. She said, you were notified of monitoring. You acknowledged it, and you proceeded to harass an employee and discuss a municipal permitting scheme with witnesses present. She placed the tablet on the table and tapped once the speakers hidden in the room played his own voice back. Crisp and unmistakable. I want you to undress here in front of everyone. The sound hit the men like a slap. One of them actually recoiled as if audio could stain him. Adrian lunged for the tablet, and one of the men behind Evelyn moved a half step, and Adrian stopped, because he recognized the look in the man's eyes. Not fear, not negotiation, just procedure. You can't do this. Adrian snapped. This is a private club. Evelyn nodded. It is, and private clubs have the right to document threats to their employees and cooperate with investigations. She turned the tablet so the table could see the timestamp and the green protected mode icon. Then she scrolled and another clip played. Your inspector already signed off Friday morning, and then Adrian. Again, we don't come here because nobody interrupts and nobody repeats what they hear. Adrian's throat worked. He looked at his friends, searching for someone to speak up, but they were avoiding his gaze like he was contagious. The man with cufflinks swallowed hard and said, Evelyn, we had no idea this was being recorded. Evelyn answered without malice. You did after you asked, and still you stayed. And then she looked at Lila and nodded once. Like a signal, Lila reached up and unclipped her name tag and flipped it around the back. Wasn't blank. It held a small laminated card with a seal and a photo that matched her face under different lighting. Adrian's eyes narrowed and then widened as recognition arrived too late. Lila said quietly, "My name is Lila Hart, but I'm not here for tips tonight. I'm here because you've been using private rooms to pressure people into silence, and you finally did it, where you couldn't buy the walls." Adrian's hand went to his pocket for his phone, and one of the plainclothes men stepped in, smoothly removing it before it cleared the fabric. Adrian's voice rose sharp. "You can't touch my property," the man replied evenly. "You can request it back through council." Evelyn slid a final page across the linen. "This is a notice that your membership is revoked effective immediately, and that all relevant recordings from tonight have been preserved for the district attorney's office as part of an ongoing investigation." Adrian stared at the paper as if it were a joke written in a language he didn't speak. Then he looked at Lila, and the hate in his eyes was pure, because for the first time in his life, someone had taken something from him that money couldn't replace. The room stayed silent as the men behind Evelyn positioned themselves near the door, and Marlow exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour, and Lila stood there steady while the billionaire realized the exit was no longer his decision. Adrian tried one last time to make the room obey him. He straightened his jacket like he could button authority back onto his chest and laughed a thin sound that didn't reach his eyes. "This is extortion," he said. "This is a setup and you'll pay for it." Evelyn Price didn't argue. She simply looked at him. The way people look at a storm they've already measured. "You're welcome to challenge it in court," she said. "But tonight is over, Mr. Voss." And she nodded toward the door. The two men who weren't staff moved with quiet certainty. One stepped slightly to Adrian's left, the other to his right, not grabbing, not shoving, just taking away options. Adrian's gaze flicked to his friends, searching for the usual reinforcement, the usual chorus of jokes and loyalty, but the table had gone cold. The man with cufflinks wouldn't meet his eyes. Another was already typing with trembling thumbs under the table, trying to rewrite his own night into something safer. The third sat too still, as if movement might make him visible. Adrian swallowed and shifted tactics. "Okay," he said softer to Lila. "Name your number," because he still believed money was the only language that mattered. "Tell me what you want, and this disappears." Lila didn't raise her voice. She didn't smile. She just said, "It's already forwarded. You can't buy back time." He stared at her like he'd never heard a sentence that didn't bend. And then his anger snapped back. "You think you're a hero," he hissed. "You're a waitress playing cop?" Lila stepped closer, just enough to make him hear every word. "I'm a woman you tried to strip in front of strangers because it amused you," she said. "And tonight, you finally did it where your power couldn't reach." The walls, Adrian's lips parted. But no clever line came because he had nothing. When the room refused to laugh for him, Evelyn gathered the papers with calm hands and slid the tablet back under her arm. "Mr. Voss," she said, "please accompany my security team out of the club. Your access is terminated and your devices will be returned through council." Adrian jerked his chin toward Marlow. "You'll lose this place," he snapped. "You'll lose everything when I'm done." Marlow's face was white, but his voice didn't break. "The meridian will be fine, sir," he said, and even he sounded surprised at his own steadiness, because he'd just realized there was a world where Adrian Voss couldn't reach him anymore. The two men guided Adrian toward the velvet curtain, and the moment they stepped into the main corridor, the restaurant's normal sounds bled back in silverware. Soft conversation, the hush of wealth. And yet the sight of him being escorted through his own sanctuary turned heads in a way no one could stop diners at other tables. Paused mid-bite. A couple near the bar stared openly. A server froze with a tray and then moved aside, like instinct had taken over. Adrian's face flushed as the realization hit him. This wasn't just a private humiliation anymore. This was public, and it was happening in real time with witnesses. He tried to pull away once, and the men didn't tighten their grip. They simply kept walking, and his attempt dissolved into the air like smoke at the front door. The host who normally greeted billionaires like royalty didn't smile. He just opened the door, and the cold city night hit Adrian's face like a slap. The sidewalk outside was slick with winter-damp headlights, passing slow and indifferent. Adrian stepped out, and for a second, he looked back at the unmarked entrance, like he couldn't believe a door had ever closed on him. Then the men turned with quiet precision, and the door shut, leaving him on the street alone with his coat, and his reputation beginning to crack inside the meridian, the private room. Stayed silent for a long beat. The remaining men looked at Evelyn like schoolboys caught in something ugly and too late. One finally spoke. "If the district attorney has this, what happens to us?" Evelyn's tone stayed neutral. "That depends on what you say next and what you did before tonight." She handed a business card to each of them one by one, and the act was gentle, but it felt like a verdict. Then she turned to Lila and lowered her voice. "Thank you." She said the audio was clean and the timing was perfect. Lila nodded as if she'd just completed a shift, because in a way she had. Her hands were steady, but her chest felt tight, like she'd been holding her breath for hours. Marlow approached her slowly, as if he didn't know what she was allowed to be. "Now, I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stopped it sooner." "You did what you could," Lila replied, and then, for the first time, her voice softened just a fraction. "I didn't come here to be brave. I came because he keeps doing it, and nobody ever makes him say it where it counts." Marlow looked down at the untouched roll of cash still sitting on the linen and then pushed it away like it disgusted him. "Keep your job?" He blurted out like he needed to repair something. Immediately, not as a favor, not as charity, as a decision. "I'll put it in writing if you want." Leela glanced at the money and then at him and shook her head. "I don't need a promise," she said. "I need a system that doesn't let men like him treat people like props." Evelyn listened and gave a small nod. That was the closest thing to applause in that room. The meeting ended quickly. After that, the men filed out in silence. No swagger, no jokes. Only the sound of their expensive shoes on carpet and the faint panic in their breathing when they thought no one noticed. Lila walked to the staff entrance at the back and stepped into the alley, where the city sounded real again. Cars, distant sirens, a gust of wind that didn't care who you were. She pulled her coat tight and started down the block, not looking back because the story was finished and she didn't need to watch it burn behind her. If you want more stories like this, where power gets flipped on its head, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what the next billionaire should try and how you want it to end.